Hitler had food tasters whose only job was to die before he did, and the OSS still found a way around them. The weapon they chose was estrogen, and it was tasteless, slow-acting, and completely undetectable. No taster would ever catch it, because it doesn't work in hours. It works in months. The goal wasn't to kill Hitler. It was to quietly dissolve the man inside the uniform, drain the aggression, erase the magnetism, and leave the machinery of the Nazi state running under a leader who no longer had the will to drive it. What follows is the full story of how that plan came together, why it made cold, strategic sense, and why a hormone was considered safer than a bullet. To understand a plan this strange, you have to meet the man who designed it. William Donovan ran America's brand new spy agency, the OSS, and he just handed a chemist named Stanley Lovell a job description most people would refuse. Think like a villain. Dream up weapons that conventional military minds wouldn't touch. Donovan even gave him a title to match. His, Professor Moriarty, after the cold-blooded criminal genius from the Sherlock Holmes stories. The war was going badly across multiple fronts, and Donovan needed ideas that the enemy would never see coming. The lab's output reflects that brief. Bat bombs were one idea, small incendiary devices attached to live bats that would roost inside enemy buildings and burn them down. Venomous snakes delivered through the mail. Explosives disguised as pieces of fruit designed to detonate when picked up. Some of these moved from paper into field testing. When estrogen entered the conversation, it wasn't sitting next to fringe lunacy. It was sitting next to operational concepts that people were actually building. The estrogen proposal grew out of a broader OSS study on Hitler's psychology and physiology. Analysts concluded he sat close to the line between male and female on the gender spectrum, closer than most men. The thinking was that a sustained estrogen dose, fed to him over months, could push his temperament across that line. Reduced aggression, softer edges, the kind of emotional flatness that makes a man hard to follow into war. Lovell pointed to Hitler's sister as the model. Paula Hitler lived quietly, worked as a secretary, and kept entirely out of public life. She had none of her brother's fury. The OSS wasn't trying to make Hitler physically unrecognizable. They were trying to make him more like Paula, mild and drained of purpose, a man whose followers would start looking elsewhere for the energy he no longer had. What made estrogen attractive wasn't just that it was undetectable. The effects would be gradual enough that no one around Hitler could identify a single moment when something changed. He'd simply become less of what he was, slowly enough that it looked like age or exhaustion or the weight of a losing war. And that was exactly the point. Getting estrogen into Hitler's body was a different problem entirely, and it started with the tasters. Hitler was convinced the British were trying to poison him through his food. His response was to build a system of human detection. Women were recruited to eat his meals before he did, sitting down at the table and waiting to see if anything happened to them. One of those women, Margot Wulck, later said she was part of a group of roughly 15 who rotated through this duty at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. She described eating every meal in fear. According to Wulck, she was the only one in her group who survived the war. The taster system worked against any poison that acted fast. If a woman collapsed at the table, the meal was pulled and the lockdown started immediately. Whatever was in the food, you'd lost your window before Hitler ever sat down. Estrogen broke that logic entirely. It's odorless, it has no taste, and a single dose does nothing. The hormone accumulates in the body over months of repeated exposure. A taster could eat Hitler's carrots every day for a year and never feel a thing. There was no symptom to catch, no threshold moment, no warning sign that something had changed. The poison, if you want to call it that, was invisible to the only defense Hitler had built. The delivery plan used that invisibility. Lovell's team proposed bribing Hitler's gardener to inject estrogen directly into the carrots growing in his garden. Hitler was a strict vegetarian, and carrots were a consistent part of his daily diet. The gardener had access to the source before any food even reached the kitchen, long before a taster ever touched it. Lovell was direct about the feasibility. He said agents could have gotten it into Hitler's food and that it was entirely possible. The operation, on paper, was achievable. What killed it, as far as Lovell could tell, was the gardener. His suspicion was that the man took the bribe, pocketed the money, and did nothing. No evidence has surfaced in any declassified record to suggest the estrogen ever reached Hitler's plate. The carrots, as far as anyone can confirm, stayed clean. The plan died in the hands of a gardener who may have simply decided the money was enough. But the strangest part of the estrogen plan isn't that it failed. It's that the men who designed it never actually wanted Hitler dead. And they weren't alone in thinking that way. While Lovell's team was dosing carrots on paper, British intelligence was circling the exact same question from behind a rifle scope. Operation Foxley was an SOE plan drawn up in 1944. The target was the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Intelligence had tracked his morning routine precisely. Each day he walked from the house to a small tea house on the hill above, a stretch of open ground where his personal security thinned out and the sightlines were clean. Planners identified it as a viable kill window. A trained shooter in the right position could take the shot before anyone on the ground could react. A second variant targeted the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Two separate opportunities on the table, both assessed as executable. The operation was scrapped before it launched. The officer most associated with killing it was Colonel Ronald Thornley, who pushed back on the core assumption that a dead Hitler would help end the war. His argument was straightforward. If Hitler was assassinated, Germany still loses, but now there's a story to tell about why. The Nazi high command could point to the killing and say the war was stolen, that Germany hadn't been beaten in the field, but stabbed from outside. A martyred Hitler hands his successors exactly the narrative they need to escape accountability for the wreck they made. Churchill's advisors carried that logic further. By 1944, Hitler's interference in military operations had become one of the Allies' quiet advantages. He refused to authorize retreats when his commanders begged for them, committing divisions to positions they couldn't hold. He overruled professional soldiers on questions of armor deployment, supply lines, and defensive strategy. He made unilateral calls at the operational level that a general with real battlefield instincts would never have made. The Eastern Front was consuming German strength at a rate that suited the Allied timetable, and Hitler's stubbornness was part of why. Replace him with someone competent and the math changes. A successor without Hitler's fixed obsessions might pull forces back to defensible lines, buy months, and potentially stabilize sectors that were actively collapsing. Worse, a new leadership might move toward a separate peace with one of the Allied powers, fracturing the coalition that was slowly grinding Germany down. The Allies needed Germany to keep losing in the way it was already losing, and Hitler, left in place, was making that happen on their behalf. This is the same logic that runs underneath the estrogen plan. Both schemes, the hormone and the bullet, were wrestling with the same problem. Removing Hitler entirely risked replacing him with someone the Allies couldn't predict or use. Keeping him weakened, confused, and stripped of whatever internal force drove his decision-making, that was the version of Hitler worth having. Foxley ran out of time anyway. Hitler left the Berghof for the last time on the 14th of July 1944. 6 days later, on the 20th of July, a bomb planted inside a briefcase at the Wolf's Lair detonated a few feet from where Hitler was standing. German officers had done what the SOE spent months planning on paper. The blast killed 4 people in the room and blew out Hitler's eardrums. He walked out of the wreckage, shaken but alive, and that same afternoon, Mussolini arrived at the Wolf's Lair by train and Hitler walked him through the bombed-out room, describing what had happened in a voice that witnesses said was strangely calm. The assassination attempt that came closest to succeeding wasn't British at all. It came from inside his own staff. Foxley never launched. The window the planners had identified closed and never reopened. 2 plans, one chemical, one aimed at a kill shot. Both assessed, both shelved, both tracing back to the same cold calculation. A dead Hitler was a problem, but a diminished one was an asset. The goal in both cases wasn't destruction, it was controlled deterioration. The OSS spent real time working out whether Hitler alive and chemically hollowed out was more valuable to the Allied war effort than Hitler removed. That's not a punchline. That's a war. For more stories about the hidden mechanics of World War II, make sure you're subscribed to the channel.